Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's uh, this expectation of total precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it feels almost like engineering, right? You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line in your bone, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is.
Right, it's a clean binary. I mean, the bone is broken or the bone is intact. There's really no debate.
Exactly. And we tend to think of the law in the exact same way. We think there is this giant objective rule book out there, and you either broke the rule or you didn't.
Yeah, which is definitely how it's presented to us.
But today, we are taking a massive shortcut into this cutting-edge field called experimental jurisprudence, or X-Jur for short.
Sure, yeah.
And scientists in this field are basically proving that the legal X-ray machine is fundamentally broken. So for this deep dive, we are pulling from a really comprehensive entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
It's a fantastic source.
It really is. We're going to explore what happens when you drag the law out of the dry textbook and drop it into the messy, unpredictable human mind.
And, the premise of X-Jur is just a total paradigm shift because for centuries, legal philosophy was entirely the domain of the armchair.
The armchair, right? Just guys sitting around thinking.
Exactly. Brilliant scholars would sit in their comfortable offices dreaming up these elaborate thought experiments. They were trying to figure out what law actually is, how rules work, and how human beings assign blame.
But they were just guessing, basically.
Well, they built the entire foundation of our legal system on their own personal intuitions. But now, cognitive scientists and empirical researchers are taking those exact philosophical thought experiments and running them in the lab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're running surveys, behavioral tests, and even brain scans on regular people to see if those centuries-old theories actually hold up in the real world.
And the reason you, listening to this right now, should care about a bunch of scientists testing legal philosophy is because the law isn't some walled garden reserved for judges.
Not at all.
The entire system runs on concepts you use every single day. Things like intent, consent, causation.
Reasonableness, yeah.
Right. And understanding the massive gap between how your brain naturally processes those concepts and how the formal legal system processes them. Well, it affects everything.
It really does. It dictates how you read the fine print on a terms of service agreement or, how you judge a coworker's mistake.
Or how you might one day sit on a jury and literally decide someone's fate.
Exactly. So let's start at the absolute foundation because it perfectly illustrates the shift from the armchair to the laboratory.
Okay, lay it on me.
What even is a legal system? Historically, there was this philosopher, Joseph Raz, who explored this by asking a pretty fundamental question.
Which was?
He asked whether coercion, so punishment, sanctions, the threat of the police, is a strictly necessary defining feature of a legal system.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is like a chef insisting a theoretical recipe will taste good, right?
Yeah.
And X-Jur is the person who actually cooks it and feeds it to a focus group to find out.
That is a perfect analogy, yes. So Raz came up with this thought experiment involving a society of angels.
Okay, so if you're listening right now, try to picture this scenario. Ask yourself, if you have a society of perfect, morally flawless angels, they obviously wouldn't need a police force.
Right, no celestial jail.
Yeah, no sanctions. They naturally just want to coordinate and do the right thing.
But they would still need rules, right? They need a system to decide, say, what side of the cloud to fly on.
Or how to resolve a good faith dispute over, like, a celestial property boundary.
Exactly. So Raz proposed that even without the threat of punishment, any human being looking at that society would still recognize their system of rules as a valid law.
So the coercion isn't the magic ingredient that makes it a law.
Right. Therefore, he argued, coercion isn't conceptually necessary for law to exist.
And for decades, academics just debated that in stuffy journals.
Oh, endlessly.
But the X-Jur researchers actually took that exact hypothetical society of angels and put it to the test. They gave the scenario to ordinary people.
And the results were fascinating.
Yeah, 59% of lay people agreed with Raz. The majority intuitively believed that a completely non-coercive system is still conceptually a legal system.
Which is huge. That empirical validation is crucial. But X-Jur actually goes much deeper than just polling people on definitions.
Right. It's not just a popularity contest.
Exactly. It attempts to explain the underlying cognitive architecture of why we define things this way. And that brings us to what researchers call the dual character concept. of legal validity.
Dual character.
Yeah, it builds on the work of philosopher Lon Fuller.
I want to make sure we really grasp this because the source material gets pretty dense right here.
It does, yeah.
So it's kind of like looking at a counterfeit $100 bill.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Descriptively, it's a piece of paper with Benjamin Franklin's face on it. It's printed with green ink. It has all the physical traits of money. But normatively, like in terms of its underlying value, it lacks the backing of the treasury. It's lacking its soul, so it's not true money. Is that how our brains view the law?
That is a phenomenal analogy, yes. Human cognition naturally splits concepts into those two characters, the descriptive facts and the normative values.
So how does that apply to a law?
Well, if a dictator passes a horribly unjust statute, say, outlawing a specific religion, people will say descriptively, yes, that is the law in that country.
Because it's on the books.
Right. But if you ask them if it's a true law, they'll say no, because it lacks that internal moral value, that soul that we intuitively expect from a legal system.
Wow. But, recognizing an abstract system of angels or a counterfeit concept is one thing. What happens when our messy human brains have to read a specific written rule?
Oh, it gets so much messier.
Right. Does that moral intuition help us, or does it completely break the system?
It definitely complicates it. Let's introduce another famous philosophical hypothetical. Imagine a city park has a sign that plainly states, "No vehicles in the park."
Okay, sounds simple enough.
The descriptive text is incredibly simple. A car obviously can't drive through, but what about an ambulance rushing in to save someone having a heart attack?
Oh.
Or what about a working truck that's been drained of all its fluids and mounted on a pedestal as a World War II monument?
Technically vehicle.
Technically. And what about a person walking through the park randomly swinging a live chainsaw?
Okay, the chainsaw is an absolute nightmare, but it's fundamentally not a vehicle.
Right. But when X-Jur researchers presented these exact scenarios to everyday people, they discovered that ordinary folks don't just read the text.
What do we do instead?
We evaluate rule violations based on a really complex subconscious negotiation between the text of the rule and the purpose of the rule.
Text versus purpose. That makes sense for the speeding car. It violates the text because it's a vehicle, and it violates the purpose, which is keeping the park safe.
Exactly. Everyone agrees that's a violation.
But the monument violates the strict text. I mean, it is a truck, but it doesn't violate the purpose because it's bolted down and completely safe.
Exactly. And the swinging chainsaw violates the purpose of safety, but it entirely bypasses the text because a chainsaw is not a mode of transportation.
But don't tell me people actually penalize the chainsaw under the vehicle rule.
They did. X-Jur studies show laypeople often penalize both the monument and the chainsaw. We stretch the rule to fit the purpose, or we completely ignore the text to serve the purpose.
But wait, isn't a rule a rule?
You'd think so.
I mean, if the text says no vehicles, the text should be absolute. If I'm a judge or a park ranger and I let the chainsaw guy go because he didn't technically bring a vehicle into the park, the city's going to fire me.
Well, what's fascinating here is that your struggle is exactly the dividing line between formal legal training and human intuition.
Really?
Yeah. X-Jur studies reveal that lawyers and judges lean significantly heavier on the strict text of a rule than lay people do.
So the pros stick to the text.
They do. And there is a fascinating psychological reason for why everyday people rely so heavily on the underlying moral purpose, especially when researchers put them under time pressure.
Time pressure changes how we read rules.
Dramatically. When people are forced to make snap judgments, their tendency to forgive a rule violation for a morally good reason, like the ambulance, skyrockets.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
Cognitively, analyzing the strict, literal text of a rule takes a lot of working memory. It's slow, analytical processing.
Right.
But judging moral intent, that's an evolutionary heuristic. Our brains are hardwired to instantly evaluate if someone is a threat or an ally.
So we just default to the easiest path.
Exactly. When cognitive load is high, we default to judging the moral purpose because it's just much faster.
That is wild. Our brains are literally taking a shortcut past the written text to get to the moral intention.
They really are.
But, okay, if we bend written rules that easily, what happens when we evaluate human actions? Let's move from reading park signs to assigning blame when things go horribly wrong in society.
You mean like criminal law and tort law?
Yeah.
This is where human intuition really clashes with the legal rulebook. For a crime to occur under common law, you generally need two elements.
Actus reus and mens rea. Right.
But actus reus is the guilty physical act, and mens rea is the guilty mind, the intent.
And the law breaks that intent down into very specific categories, right?
It does. The model penal code in the U.S. distinguishes sharply between different levels of a guilty mind.
Give me an example.
Well, the critical distinction is between knowing an outcome will happen, meaning you are practically certain your action would cause the result, and merely being reckless about it.
Reckless meaning.
Meaning you consciously ignored a substantial risk, but you weren't certain it would happen.
And the difference between those two mental states can mean the difference between a few years in prison and a life sentence.
Exactly. It's a massive difference legally.
Right.
But X-Jur surveys show that laypeople struggle terribly to make this distinction.
We just blur them together.
Constantly. When ordinary folks are given scenarios, they constantly blur the line between a perpetrator who knew what would happen and one who was just reckless.
Because we just care about the outcome.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The legal system assumes humans can neatly compartmentalize these mental states, but our psychology naturally smears them together based on how bad the final outcome is.
Okay, so if our brains blur the lines on criminal intent, what happens when it comes to civil wrongs and physical causation?
Oh, tort law.
Yeah, because the source material talks about this incredible study by a researcher named Alec regarding tort law and culpable causation. And it completely blew my mind.
The Alaki study is a perfect example of how our moral judgments distort our literal perception of physical reality.
Walk us through it.
Okay, participants are given a scenario where a driver is speeding down a road, hits an oil slick, and gets into a terrible accident.
Standard car crash scenario.
Right. In scenario A, the driver is speeding because he is rushing home to hide a vial of cocaine.
Okay, obviously bad.
But in scenario B, the exact same driver, on the exact same road, hitting the exact same oil slick at the exact same speed, is rushing home to hide an anniversary gift for his parents.
So the physics are identical.
Identical.
The speed, the oil, the mass of the car. The physical timeline of cause and effect does not change one bit.
Not one bit. But when asked if the driver actually caused the accident, people are significantly more likely to say yes in the cocaine scenario.
Why? How is that cognitively possible?
It's a phenomenon driven by motivated reasoning and our evolutionary psychology.
Motivated reasoning.
Yeah. As social creatures, we have this deep-seated evolutionary drive to identify and punish bad actors who threaten the group.
So the cocaine guy is a threat.
Exactly. When we see someone doing something morally bad, our brain decides they need to be punished.
Yeah.
And to justify that punishment rationally, our subconscious actually reconstructs the timeline of events.
Wait, really?
Yeah. We magnify the driver's role in the physical chain of causality and minimize the role of the oil slick. We literally alter our perception of physics to satisfy our moral outrage.
We rewrite the physics of a car crash in our heads just to punish the bad guy. That is terrifying.
It really makes you rethink eyewitness testimony, doesn't it?
It does. And if our brains distort physical causality that easily, what happens with something entirely subjective like agreeing to a contract?
Oh, consent is a whole other minefield.
Because we've all quickly clicked agree on an app without reading the terms. Does our messy psychology warp how we view consent too?
It fundamentally rewrites it. To illustrate this, researchers tested a scenario involving a patient named Marvin who needs ankle surgery.
Poor Marvin.
Right. So Marvin tells his doctor he will only agree to the surgery if his insurance covers it.
A very reasonable request.
Totally. But the doctor flat out lies to Marvin and says, yes, your insurance covers this completely, knowing full well Marvin will be hit with a massive out-of-pocket bill.
Oh, that's awful.
Based on that lie, Marvin says, okay, let's do it.
Now, legally speaking, the doctrine of consent requires autonomy. If your autonomy is violated by deception, your consent is invalid.
Right.
So a contract built on a lie is void.
That is the canonical legal view, absolutely. But when X-Jur researchers surveyed regular people on this scenario, 66% of people said that Marvin did consent to the surgery despite the blatant deception.
If the legal standard says deception ruins consent, but 66% of regular folks say it doesn't, what does this mean? 2/3 of people look at a lie that voids a contract and say, nope, he still agreed.
Yeah, it's wild.
Why are we so willing to throw out the concept of autonomy?
Because ordinary people tend to view consent functionally, not philosophically.
Functionally, meaning?
Lay people focus on the practical agreement to the physical act. Marvin wanted his ankle fixed, and he agreed to let the doctor cut into his ankle.
Oh, I see.
The financial deception, while terrible, is viewed as a separate moral wrong. It's not seen as something that retroactively erases the physical permission he gave.
But think about what that means for a jury. The judge is instructing the jury on the strict legal standard that deception ruins consent. But 2/3 of the people in that jury box have brains wired to believe the exact opposite.
Exactly.
Are we just constantly applying the law wrong?
Well, you've hit on the central tension of the entire X-Jur field.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When there is a massive chasm between strict legal doctrine and ordinary human cognition, what is the solution?
Right. Do we change the law or the people?
Exactly. Do we engage in conceptual engineering? Do we rewrite the laws to better align with how human brains actually work, just to maintain the system's democratic legitimacy? Or do we go the other direction? Do we aggressively instruct juries to ignore their gut instincts? Because, as we saw with the speeding car, human intuition is hopelessly biased by moral luck and motivated reasoning.
Wow. And because our human instincts are so tangled, researchers aren't just relying on written surveys anymore, are they?
No, they've had to upgrade their toolkit.
They are turning to big data and high-tech medical equipment to find objective truths. And this brings us to the cutting-edge methodologies being used today and the massive backlash they've provoked from traditional legal scholars.
The methodologies are genuinely pushing the boundaries of science. Remember earlier how we talked about people struggling to distinguish between a knowing state of mind and a reckless state of mind on surveys?
Yeah, the criminal intent stuff.
Well, researchers partnered with neuroscientists to see if the brain itself knows the difference.
Like looking inside the skull.
Literally. They placed participants inside fMRI brain scanners and gave them scenarios designed to elicit either knowing or reckless mental states, while a machine learning algorithm analyzed the blood flow in their brains.
What did the algorithms actually find? How does a legal concept look inside the brain?
It all comes down to which neural pathways activate. The algorithm could accurately classify a person's brain activity as either knowing or reckless 71% of the time.
71%. That's impressive.
It is. When a person is knowing, meaning they are certain of an outcome, the brain relies on regions associated with processing concrete facts and episodic memory.
Okay, so fact-checking mode.
Right. But when a person is reckless, meaning they are weighing a substantial risk, the brain shifts activation to regions in the prefrontal cortex associated with processing probabilities and managing uncertainty.
So even if we can't articulate the difference between knowing and reckless on a piece of paper, our neurons are physically routing the information differently.
We are biologically wired for these legal distinctions even if we can't express them.
That is staggering.
It is. And beyond neuroscience, researchers are also using massive observational data sets to study the highest levels of the law.
Oh, like Supreme Court data.
Yes. For example, researchers analyzed decades of free speech decisions made by U.S. Supreme Court justices to see if ideological bias could be empirically measured.
And this is where we have to be super clear that we're just reporting the data here.
Absolutely. The data revealed a measurable in-group bias across the entire ideological spectrum.
Across the whole spectrum.
Yes. Regardless of whether a justice leaned liberal or conservative, the algorithm found they were statistically more likely to support a free speech claim when the speaker's political message aligned with their own personal values.
It demonstrates that even at the absolute pinnacle of legal training, human cognition, heuristics, and in-group bias play a measurable role in how the law is applied.
No one is immune to human psychology.
But all of this, putting people in fMRI machines, analyzing Supreme Court data, surveying folks about ankle surgeries, it has triggered a fierce pushback from the traditional legal establishment.
Oh, massive pushback. They call it the expertise defense.
The expertise defense, what's their argument?
The critics argue that X-Jur is fundamentally misguided because it spends way too much time caring about what everyday laypeople think.
They don't care about the focus group.
Nope. And they highlight a valid methodological concern. A lot of these studies rely on weird populations.
Weird meaning.
Yeah.
Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Right. If you only survey college students in the U.S., you might not be mapping universal human nature. You might just be mapping a specific cultural bias.
That's fair.
But the critics' bigger argument is that jurisprudence, the philosophy of law, is an expert domain. They argue that we shouldn't care what a random person on the street thinks about a complex legal doctrine like proximate cause.
Proximate cause being the standard for if an injury was foreseeable enough to assign liability.
Exactly. They believe we should only be studying the intuitions of highly trained legal officials.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. To be fair, I kind of get that.
You do?
Yeah. If I need a complicated heart bypass surgery, I am not going to survey 100 random people on the street to ask how to reroute my arteries.
Probably a smart move.
I'm going to ask a trained cardiovascular surgeon. So why shouldn't the philosophy of law be left exclusively to the experts with the PhDs and the law degrees?
It's a very compelling analogy, but it kind of falls apart when you look at the actual function of law.
How so?
Law isn't medicine. It isn't a walled-off scientific discipline dealing with human biology. It is a social institution.
A social institution.
Yeah. In a democratic society, regular people are the legal system. We are the ones who sit on juries and decide if a defendant was reckless or knowing.
Right. The system relies on us.
We sign terms of service agreements. We elect the lawmakers based on our moral intuitions.
Plus, the idea that there is this unified expert consensus to rely on seems to be a bit of a myth anyway, isn't it?
It absolutely is a myth. The source material highlights this beautifully. Take the concept of legal positivism.
Which is?
It's the widely debated theory that a law is just a set of social rules created by humans, completely separate from whether those rules are morally good or bad.
Okay, so the law is the law, regardless of morals.
Right. When researchers surveyed academics, they found that 74% of law professors endorse legal positivism.
So a huge majority.
But only 40% of philosophy professors endorse it. Yeah. So even among the highest tier of credentialed scholars, the fundamental nature of what law is remains heavily contested. You can't just defer to the experts because the experts fundamentally disagree with each other.
Wow. We have covered some incredible ground today.
We really have.
I mean, we started with armchair philosophers imagining societies of flawless angels.
No coercion needed.
Right. Then we navigated through how our brains bend written rules using chainsaws in city parks. We explored the motivated reasoning that warps our literal perception of car crashes and medical consent.
Poor Marvin.
Poor Marvin. And we ended up inside fMRI machines looking at the neural pathways of a guilty mind.
And, the most important takeaway for you listening right now is that you are actively participating in the folk jurisprudence that these scientists are studying.
Every single day.
Every time you judge a coworker's intentions when they miss a deadline, every time you quickly click agree on an app update, or every time you try to decide who's morally at fault in a fender bender, your brain is using these exact conceptual frameworks.
You are doing the heavy lifting of the legal system in your daily life.
Exactly, relying on those evolutionary heuristics and moral intuitions.
It's really incredible to realize how much complex legal philosophy we are processing just by, walking through the world.
It's everywhere.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Okay.
As our justice system increasingly looks to artificial intelligence and large language models to draft contracts or even to help interpret complex statutes, what happens when those AIs are trained on the internet?
Oh, man. They're being trained on us.
Exactly. They're being trained on our messy, motivated, biased folk intuitions about the law rather than strict, pristine legal codes.
That is a terrifying thought.
Will the AI judge the future, evaluate us by the cold, hard, objective letter of the law, or by the unpredictable, morally biased compass of the human crowd it learned from?
Definitely something to mull over.
So the next time someone tells you the law is just a clean, binary medical x-ray, remember the armchair, remember the lab, and remember that the most complex, unpredictable legal instrument in the entire world is sitting right between your ears.